Our favorite celebs might make becoming famous look easy, but in reality, the road to success is anything but simple.
Nobody believed you could become anything as a little black girl.
To make things even more difficult, some of today's most high-profile celebrities have experienced some childhood traumas which make their victories all the more extraordinary.
It's very emotionally draining at times.
Some of these occurrences played out in the public eye, but other stars suffered in silence.
I didn't like that feeling. It was heavy.
Today, we're going to be talking about some celebrities who have managed to overcome seemingly insurmountable odds and completely turn their lives around. You might just be inspired by what all these celebrities have managed to accomplish after all they've been through. Some people have difficult childhoods because their parents divorced or they were the victim of bullying. We aren't trying to minimize these things at all. They're truly painful and can leave children feeling traumatized. But when you look at the childhood of Drew Barrymore, it's shocking she isn't a total mess as an adult. In fact, she has had a long and successful career and is currently killing it on the Santa Clarita Diet. Drew Barrymore. Drew Barrymore comes from a long line of actors and practically grew up in the spotlight, but that's not necessarily a good thing. Her father, John Barrymore, struggled with alcoholism and an increasingly violent temper. Eventually, her mother Jade left him and attempted to raise Drew on her own. When Drew was only 7 years old, she was already drinking alcohol and would even top her ice cream with a dash of Baileys. She was also a regular at the infamous Studio 54, a place which is not exactly known for being kid-friendly. Although she was an adorable child star, eventually studios couldn't look the other way anymore when it became clear Drew was suffering from mental health and substance abuse issues. At the age of 8, she considered herself a party girl, and by the time she was 13, she was sent to rehab for the first time. After that, Drew spent 18 months in an institution for the mentally ill. For years, she struggled with self-harm and felt overcome with anger towards her parents. She felt abandoned and struggled to connect with other kids her own age who couldn't relate to what she was going through. At 15 years old, she filed for emancipation and moved into her own apartment, desperate to get away from her mother and take control of her own life. However, she struggled to maintain her apartment, which was located in a bad neighborhood and had bars on the windows. But by the time she was a teenager, studios refused to hire her because of her troubled past. Drew says some would outright laugh in her face when she turned up to audition. For about 3 years, nobody would hire her until she scored the part of Ivy in the movie Poison Ivy. Although the movie was a flop at the box office, it got Drew back into acting. Over the next year, she appeared in 16 more movies, including classics like Batman Forever, Scream, and The Wedding Singer. 3 years after this, she was producing and starring in the movie Never Been Kissed. Drew discovered that she enjoys directing and producing even more than she likes acting and revels in being an integral part of the creation process. She's also begun to explore photography in hopes of showing her work in a gallery someday. Her life is now something she could have never imagined when she was younger, and Drew is proud of how far she's come. Robert Downey Jr. Like Drew Barrymore, actor Robert Downey Jr. grew up surrounded by drugs. His father, Robert Downey Sr., was a drug addict himself and would let his son smoke pot when he was only 6 years old. Later, his father would come to regret introducing his son to drugs, but Robert Downey Jr. simply believes his childhood was interesting. He loved his father and believed that by sharing drugs with him, his father was trying to bond with him in his own clumsy and dysfunctional way. He claimed his father didn't know how to connect with his son, and this was his way of reaching out. But the father and son duo did more than simply use drugs together. Robert made his acting debut when he was 5 years old in his father's movie Pound. His father guided his acting career, and at first it really seemed to take off. Eventually, Robert dropped out of school in order to pursue acting full-time. But behind the scenes, Robert's life was quickly getting out of control. He was increasingly reliant on drugs and alcohol and claims he couldn't fall asleep unless he was drunk. Whenever he wasn't acting, he was calling around to find out what he had to do to get his next fix. On the outside, it seemed like his career was going nowhere but up, but the reality was that Robert had been an addict since he was 8 years old. In 1996, he was pulled over for speeding and cops found a variety of drugs and a gun in his vehicle. He was sent to a rehab facility but promptly broke out, only to be sent to an even more secure one, which he also escaped from. While out on parole, he broke into a neighbor's house and passed out on the bed of their 11-year-old son. Robert declared the event an uncommon occurrence, not because he wasn't regularly abusing drugs, but because they rarely made him lose consciousness anymore. Constantly in trouble with the law at this point, he stood in front of a judge and proclaimed, "It's like I have a shotgun in my mouth and I've got my finger on the trigger and I like the taste of the gunmetal." It seems like many celebrities get a pass on abusing substances, and getting a DUI is almost a rite of passage for celebs. But Robert learned the hard way that it is possible to go too far, even as a celebrity. Eventually, his personal life had bled too far into his work performance, and he was showing up late, if at all, and delivering subpar work. In 2001, he was arrested after being found wandering around near Los Angeles without any shoes on, and tested positive for drugs. This was the final straw that got him fired from Ally McBeal and caused companies to refuse to insure him any longer. Getting clean wasn't easy, but once he was back on his feet, Robert still had a serious problem. Studios didn't want to work with him anymore, and even those who did want to hire him couldn't do so because of the lack of insurance. Thankfully, his friend Mel Gibson paid for his insurance out of his own pocket, which allowed Robert to appear in the movie The Singing Detective. This made him hireable again, but studios would withhold large portions of his salary to ensure his cooperation during filming. Eventually, he landed a major blockbuster role when he was hired by Marvel Studios to portray the role of Tony Stark in Iron Man. Not only did this movie kick off the behemoth, which is the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but it made Robert a household name, and this time for the right reasons. He's now the third highest-grossing U.S. domestic box office star of all time, with his films bringing in over $11.6 billion worldwide. Macaulay Culkin. One of the most notable child stars of all time is Macaulay Culkin. He started acting when he was only 4 years old and starred in some of our favorite childhood movies, including Home Alone, The Pagemaster, and Richie Rich. When he was at the peak of his fame, he was widely regarded as the biggest child star since the famous Shirley Temple. It was rare that a list about famous child stars was released without featuring the name Macaulay Culkin. And then, all of a sudden, he disappeared. Well, okay, he didn't really disappear off the face of the earth, but he did stop acting. He claimed he wanted a normal life and started attending high school and refused to appear in any more movies. Many fans were both disappointed and confused by this seemingly abrupt change. And for many years, Macaulay tried to keep things quiet and avoided talking about his private life. But eventually, he revealed that his parents had split up after the filming of Richie Rich in 1994, and that he considered it one of the best things that had ever happened to him. According to Macaulay, his father, Christopher Culkin, was a former actor and Broadway producer who pushed his young son into show business. Christopher had always been disappointed that his own acting career hadn't developed the way that he wanted it to, so he heaped tons of pressure on his son. And although he desperately wanted Macaulay to succeed, at the same time, he resented him for his success. Macaulay claims he accomplished all of his father's life dreams before he was 10 years old, and this infuriated him. Not only did Christopher force his young son to work, but he would frequently threaten him with physical violence if he didn't perform well. Macaulay has called his father mentally and physically abusive and says he felt the weight of the world on his shoulders at an incredibly young age. He accuses both of his parents of exploiting him for financial gain and slapped them with a $17 million lawsuit when he was only 15 years old. He also had them removed as his legal guardians so they would not be able to take away any more money from him. In 2004, Macaulay was arrested for possession of marijuana and 2 prescription drugs, which resulted in a misdemeanor charge, a 3-year suspended sentence, and a fine. According to Macaulay, he has never had a drug or alcohol problem, and if he wasn't a former child star, nothing about his arrest would have been notable. For a period of time, he was dating actress Mila Kunis, who claims the way people reacted to Macaulay when they were out in public was far different from what other celebs experience. His fans tend to be rather hysterical, according to her, and it made it difficult for Macaulay to live the normal life he so desperately wanted. For someone who grew up being forced to work under threats of physical violence, all Macaulay has ever wanted to do is be able to live life on his own terms. And that's what he seems to be doing. He's gone back to acting, but is taking things slowly instead of cranking out movie after movie like he used to. He's also tried his hand at writing, he's launched a comedy website called Bunny Ears, and was in a band called the Pizza Underground. In 2017, he started dating his Changeland co-star Brenda Song, and these days he seems to be genuinely happy. Lupita Nyong'o. Lupita Nyong'o may be a critically acclaimed actress now, but her childhood is almost too crazy to be believed. Her parents are from Kenya, but were forced to flee to Mexico before Lupita was born. Her father, Peter Nyong'o, was fighting for democracy in Kenya, which put his whole family in danger. At one point, his brother Charles Nyong'o disappeared after being thrown from a ferry, and Peter believes this was done to intimidate him. Eventually, Peter took his family back to Kenya, but danger became a very clear and present threat to all of their lives. When Lupita was only 4 years old, she remembered helping her parents shovel evidence into a fire, although she didn't truly realize what was going on at the time. Her parents knew that the more they told Lupita, the more danger she would be in. Things got so bad, Lupita could no longer go to school, and instead her parents would huddle inside the house with the doors locked and blinds drawn. But despite all of this, Lupita had a very active imagination. Since she couldn't go to school, she would make up intricate stories about what would have happened if she had been able to attend. Eventually, she was able to attend school, but it wasn't exactly everything she had hoped it would be. She was constantly teased because of how dark her skin is, and her second-grade teacher told her she would never find a husband because of it. Each night before she went to bed, Lupita would desperately pray for lighter skin, and every morning when she awoke, she would rush to the mirror to see if her dream had come true, only to see her normal reflection. But that changed the first time Lupita saw the movie The Color of Purple. She saw people who looked like her in a movie for the first time and realized she too could be an actress someday. She moved to the United States to attend Hampshire College and graduated with a degree in film and theater studies. Although Lupita was talented, she still struggled with her appearance and was frequently told that her natural hair would make her unemployable. But Lupita refused to give up and hoped someday she could be an icon for young girls who struggled to accept their appearances the way she once had. Her breakthrough role came when she was cast in the movie 12 Years a Slave, and her performance earned her an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress. This made her the first Kenyan and the first Mexican actress to win an Academy Award. Although she's a successful movie star now, Lupita definitely has not forgotten where she came from. In 2017, she appeared on the cover of Grazia magazine and was upset to see her image had been altered to hide her natural appearance. She called the magazine out online, admonishing them for altering her natural hairstyle to conform to their idea of beauty. The controversy ended with Lupita getting an apology from the magazine and sending a message of self-acceptance to many of her fans. Shakira. Many of us dream of someday becoming wealthy so we can treat ourselves to some of life's luxuries. But Shakira had one goal in mind when she started her career: shoes. No, not expensive shoes for herself, but for children who struggled with not being able to afford any. Shakira had a close relationship with her father, who struggled to keep his business afloat. Eventually, her family lost everything, and she had to watch her parents sell off all of her possessions just to make ends meet. To keep things in perspective, her father took her to meet some children who had even less than she did, and were forced to walk around barefoot. Shakira promised herself that if she could ever afford to, she would buy shoes for those children. But tragedy wasn't done striking her family, and one of her older brothers was killed in a car accident. Her father was so distraught he took to wearing a pair of sunglasses constantly so his other children wouldn't see the tears in his eyes. The first song Shakira ever wrote was called Your Dark Glasses and was inspired by her father. Shakira had been interested in singing since her father took her to a Middle Eastern restaurant in order to see a musical act and watch belly dancer performers. She immediately signed up to sing in the school choir, but there was a bit of a problem. Her singing teacher despised her voice and compared her singing to that of a goat. It seemed as though nobody around her enjoyed Shakira's unique sound, but she refused to let that stop her from trying. Finally, she got her chance at stardom, only for her first 2 albums to be commercial failures. Sony Music only gave her $100,000 to put together her third, with the understanding that if it flopped, as they predicted it would, she would be let go. Shakira knew this was her last chance, so she took over production of the album herself and looked to her past for inspiration. Her third album, Pies Descalzos or Bare Feet, was a huge hit and kicked off her first international tour. Now, Shakira is a huge hit both inside and outside Latin America. With the money she earned from her third album, she was able to start the Pies Descalzos Foundation, which helps provide impoverished Colombian children with access to education and supplies, including shoes, of course. Jamie Foxx. Jamie Foxx was abandoned by his parents when he was born. They left him to be taken in by his grandmother, and although she raised him as her own, Jamie struggled with feelings of abandonment. For years, he wondered what was so wrong with him that his own parents didn't want him any longer. His grandmother encouraged him to immerse himself in music in order to drown out any negativity he faced. He started playing the piano when he was 5 years old, and as a teenager, he started getting hired to perform. One day, he performed at a private residence during a lavish party. While he was playing, he overheard all of the guests making racist jokes at his expense and assuring him they were just kidding. Jamie started to sing along with the music in order to drown out all of the jokes surrounding him. For years, Jamie had tried reaching out to his parents, desperate for an explanation of why they had abandoned him. In that time, his mother had remarried and had a child with her new husband. His sister Deandra was born with Down syndrome, and Jamie fell in love with her the moment he first held her in his arms. He was determined to succeed in the entertainment industry, not just for himself, but for his precious little sister. Jamie wanted her to have all of the resources she could ever need and didn't want to see her struggle. Eventually, this meant having Deandra move into his home and their mother along with her. Jamie still felt a lot of resentment over being abandoned as a baby, but he was finally able to forgive her and forge a new relationship with her as an adult. Now, Deandra is an ambassador for the Global Down Syndrome Foundation. Her big brother Jamie is a Grammy Award-winning musician, an Academy Award-winning actor, and a celebrated comedian. Charlize Theron. For Charlize Theron, her childhood was not only traumatic for her, but for her beloved mother as well. Her father was an alcoholic who was prone to violent mood swings. Charlize claims he was completely unpredictable and caused his family to live in fear of him every single day. She recalls waking up in the morning unsure what would happen when she got out of bed. Whether she was going to experience violence or abuse was mostly dependent on how much her father would have to drink that day. It was a nightmarish time for Charlize, and school didn't provide much of an escape. She struggled to fit in with her peers and was desperate for their approval. But the kids at her school were cruel to her and mocked her for her nerdy glasses, haircut, and clothes. Charlize wanted nothing more than to make friends, but sadly she found herself unable to, and gradually became numb to the constant rejection. To make matters worse, Charlize suffered from jaundice, which caused issues with her teeth. Up until she was 11 years old, she didn't have any teeth at all, because the antibiotics she was on caused them to rot out of her mouth. Looking at her beautiful smile today, it's hard to imagine her going through something like this. At home, things with her father were only getting worse, and soon things reached a tipping point. It was the worst he had ever been, and he threatened to harm Charlize, while he physically attacked her mother in front of her. Charlize's mother was left with no choice but to defend herself and shot and killed her husband. In the aftermath of the shooting, it was found to have been done in self-defense and no charges were filed. And surprisingly, Charlize said the incident didn't affect her as much as she thought it might. It was the years of constant terror and unpredictability which had been the most difficult to deal with, and she was done letting her father control her life now that he was finally gone. According to Charlize, the only difficult part of the situation was explaining what had happened to other people. She grew tired of the shock, horror, and outpouring of sympathy she received when she shared her story. Although it was a tragic event, Charlize was determined to not let it define her. When she began acting, she found herself frequently turning down roles which would have required her to play attractive but ultimately shallow female characters. Charlize knew she wanted to make a lifelong career in Hollywood and worried taking one of those roles would affect how people see her. This paid off, and she's since appeared in many popular movies including Hancock, Prometheus, Mad Max Fury Road, and Atomic Blonde. For her portrayal of serial killer Eileen Wuornos in Monster, Charlize became the first South African to win an Oscar in a major acting category. Christina Aguilera. Christina Aguilera started her career young when she appeared on the Mickey Mouse Club before making it big as a singer. But the early years of her life were far more painful than most people realize. According to Christina, her father was both mentally and physically abusive to his family. Christina claims she frequently saw her father commanding her mother to do things, and she vowed would never let a man take advantage of her like that. But this was easier said than done, and Christina admitted she didn't have many strong female role models when she was growing up. She thought the way her father made her inferior, small, and helpless was the way women were supposed to feel all the time. Although it isn't as well known as some of her hit singles, Christina's song I'm Okay details the abuse she witnessed as a young girl. The song also asserts Christina would cry in her room during these attacks, desperately hoping her father's rampage would soon end. Christina admits she threw herself into her music in order to escape from the pain she felt because of her father's abusive behavior. Not only did this help Christina cultivate her own musical talent, but it inspired her to be her own best advocate. She never wanted to have to rely on a man for money or for any other reason. And her determination and talent have definitely paid off for her over the years. Over the course of her career, Christina has sold over 75 million records all over the world and is one of the best-selling musical artists of all time. She's even stated that she would be open to reconciling with her estranged father at some point, but it seems as though he isn't eager to take her up on it. He insists he never abused Christina or her siblings, despite what the rest of his family says. However, he does admit to striking his wife, although he insists he was never brutal about it. Eminem. Marshall Mathers, better known as Eminem, is another celebrity who used music to escape from a painful childhood. As a young boy, Eminem was abandoned by his father, but would frequently send his dad letters pleading for a relationship with him. All of his mail went unanswered and marked return to sender. His mother struggled to make ends meet, and the family ended up moving around every year or so. School can be difficult for any kid, but Eminem in particular struggled to make friends. His own relatives described him as being a bit of a loner, and he frequently found himself the target of bullying. Although most of it was verbal, from time to time things did escalate and get physical. One bully named D'Angelo Bailey attacked him and caused serious injury to his head. Eminem would later use this incident as inspiration for the song Brain Damage, and D'Angelo was not happy about his claim to fame. He filed a lawsuit against Eminem alleging defamation of character, but it ended up being dismissed by a judge. But Eminem did have one good friend growing up, and that was his uncle, Ronnie Polkinghorne. The two were very close, and Ronnie brought him the soundtrack to the movie Breakin', which is how Eminem heard his very first rap song. Unfortunately, Ronnie suffered from intense bouts of depression and ended up taking his own life. In the days that followed, Eminem refused to speak to anyone and couldn't bring himself to attend his beloved uncle's funeral. Eminem's relationship with his mother has always been difficult at best. Later in life, she would sue her own son for $10 million, alleging he had slandered her on his album, The Slim Shady LP. In his songs, he claimed to have been a victim of Munchausen syndrome at the hands of his mother and stated that his mother often imbibed him in illegal substances. Eminem spent a large sum of money on his legal defense for this lawsuit, and his mother's lawyer remarked that it would have been financially smarter just to settle. But Eminem's contempt for his mother was so great he would rather throw away his money than give her any of it. Eminem's life would get harder before it got better, but these days he prefers to live a quiet and relatively private life while concentrating on his music, and his career has been extremely successful despite his hardships. He's sold over 220 million records all over the world and is one of the best-selling musical artists of all time. Nicole Richie. Unlike the other celebrities we've talked about so far, Nicole Richie's childhood wasn't marked by abuse or neglect. Not only did she never have to worry about where her next meal was coming from, but she even admits she was constantly overindulged by the adults in her life. But spoiling your child isn't always the right thing, and in many ways, Nicole was set up for failure as a young child. Her biological parents are Peter Escobedo and Karen Moss, and when Nicole was born, things got even harder for the already struggling couple. Not only were they desperately trying to earn money, but their relationship was suffering from the strain of their precarious financial situation. Her parents were friends with Lionel Richie and his wife at the time, Brenda Harvey, and they offered to take Nicole in when she was 3 years old. Nicole's biological parents believed Lionel and Brenda would be able to provide a better life for their daughter, so they allowed the adoption to take place. But Lionel and Brenda were about to go through their own rough time as a result of Lionel's infidelity. When Nicole was 9 years old, Brenda discovered her husband was having an affair, and the two began an extremely bitter divorce. Although Lionel and Brenda treated each other with contempt during this time, they knew their actions were having an effect on their adopted daughter, Nicole. To make up for it, they both set about trying to spoil the little girl as much as possible, but even Nicole claims they went way too far. In retrospect, Nicole wishes her parents had put some limitations on her behavior instead of constantly indulging her every whim. She was never really told no by either of her parents, and you can imagine the effect that had on her. Before long, Nicole was a totally out-of-control teenager, and her parents were at a loss about how to handle her. Lionel even admits he had no clue how to react to his daughter when she was a teenager and started using drugs and staying out all night partying. He claims he begged his younger daughter Sophia Richie not to follow in Nicole's footsteps because he didn't think he could take it. Nicole was the absolute epitome of a wild child who had never been told no and had the resources to get into a considerable amount of trouble. She first got arrested in 2002 for fighting in a New York City nightclub, but the charges for this were ultimately dropped. Next came her issues with substances and driving under the influence, which ultimately resulted in her spending 82 minutes in prison. Yes, minutes. She was released early due to overcrowding and later enrolled in an anti-drinking program as a term of her probation. It took a while for Nicole to get clean and learn to take responsibility for her own actions, but she's been able to build up a successful career in fashion and even does some modeling from time to time. She's also happily married and a mom to 2 of her own beautiful children. Rihanna. Growing up in Barbados, Rihanna saw some things when she was a child which may seem strange or even unsettling to many of us. In the small community she grew up in, religion was extremely important, and the church she and her family attended practiced regular exorcisms. Rihanna explained that she would be in the middle of a church ceremony when she would hear terrifying screaming, and everyone would rush to pray over the afflicted person. On one notable occasion, one ritual was even hosted inside Rihanna's home, and she was locked in her bedroom while it was going on. All she could do was wait helplessly and listen to the shrieks coming from the other side of the locked door. Rihanna is able to look back on this memory with some amusement now, but she admits that at the time she was terrified, especially when the power went out due to a storm. But surprisingly enough, these exorcisms weren't the scariest part of Rihanna's childhood. Her father had serious issues with alcohol and addiction and was abusive towards her mother. Their relationship was under constant and severe strain as their fights grew increasingly worse. This often left Rihanna responsible for caring for her younger brother, and Rihanna describes feeling like a mother herself. That's a lot of responsibility for a young girl. During this time, Rihanna began to experience excruciatingly painful headaches which were downright debilitating. She spent a lot of time in and out of the hospital, and doctors were even worried that she might have a brain tumor due to the intensity of these headaches. However, it turns out these headaches were anxiety-related, and she had built up a ton of stress about her parents' troubled relationship. When Rihanna was 14, her parents finally got divorced and her health dramatically improved. But while things were better at home, they were still tough at school. Rihanna was ridiculed by her classmates because of the color of her skin, and as a result, she withdrew and gained a reputation for being quite shy. We know that fact may be difficult to reconcile with the way Rihanna is now, but it's true. She's the most streamed female artist of all time on both Spotify and Apple Music. She has won 9 Grammy Awards, 13 American Music Awards, and 12 Billboard Music Awards. But despite her long list of accomplishments, Rihanna admits she has spent much of her life plagued with anger about what she experienced during her childhood. To move forward in life, Rihanna had to learn to forgive her father for the way he had treated her mother. She claims that he was a terrible husband but a good father, and she now enjoys having a relationship with him. Sadly, Rihanna would also experience violence in her own relationship with singer Chris Brown. Although the two have long since ended their romantic relationship, which at one point left Rihanna in the hospital, she still claims to care for him. Rihanna says she has forgiven Chris just as she has forgiven her father. Although she's forgiven her dad, this doesn't mean their relationship is drama-free. In February 2019, she filed a lawsuit against her own father over the use of the name Fenty. Her father started a company called Fenty Entertainment, and Rihanna claims her cosmetics brand has been damaged as a result of its assumed association with his brand. Only time will tell if this father-daughter duo will be able to work things out. Oprah. Next up in the category of single-name celebrities who need no introduction, we have Oprah. Oprah has her own talk show, her own magazine, legions of adoring fans, and has a net worth of over $2 billion. But her story is a true rags-to-riches tale, and it's not for the faint of heart. As a child, Oprah lived in utter poverty with her grandparents. She might have an enviable wardrobe now, but at this time she was literally forced to wear clothing made out of potato sacks because it's all her family could afford. Needless to say, this sad fact was not lost on the local children who proceeded to tease her mercilessly about it, and things weren't much better for her at home. Oprah claims her grandmother was a firm believer in corporal punishment and would strike Oprah with a stick if she ever stepped a toe out of line. Later in life, Oprah admitted she had been victimized by several men starting when she was 9 years old. She tried to confide in several of her family members, but they refused to believe her and did nothing to stop the abuse. As an adult, Oprah has been relatively open about the things she's experienced in life, but there is one thing she doesn't like discussing, and that's the birth of her son. When Oprah was only 14, she became pregnant after running away from home a year earlier. Her son was born prematurely and sadly passed away. Although she hoped to keep this private, a family member sold the story to the National Enquirer years later, leaving Oprah feeling utterly betrayed. Oprah has achieved so many amazing things in her life, but many fans wonder why she's never gone on to have more children. Although there's nothing wrong with choosing not to have a child, Oprah's reasoning is quite heartbreaking and highlights how dysfunctional her upbringing truly was. She claims that she never received any genuine motherly love or affection as a child and wouldn't want another child to experience what she did growing up. But despite her difficult early years, Oprah does credit her grandmother with paving the way for her success. She admits that her grandmother had always encouraged her to learn how to speak in public, and as a child she would often conduct interviews with her toys and the local crows. Oprah's story is nothing short of inspiring, and she is considered one of the greatest philanthropists in American history. Now that you've learned the true life story of some of your favorite celebrities, which one left you feeling the most inspired? Whose journey did you find the most impressive? Share your thoughts with us in the comment section below, and then click on the subscribe button to get access to the latest and greatest videos from the taco. Bye for now.